In 1943, before sunrise, the huge Ford plant at Willow Run slowly comes alive. At first, there's only the cold, metallic smell of oil and dew. Then a low hum starts deep inside the building. One worker said the place woke up like a machine stretching its arms. Another remembered the floor trembling before the lights even came on. You felt the plant before you saw it. Willow Run was enormous, 3.5 million square feet, the largest factory in the world at the time. Its mission was simple to describe and almost impossible to achieve. Mass-produce the B-24 Liberator bomber, an aircraft with over 1.5 million parts. Soon, tens of thousands of workers stream onto the factory floor. Many had never touched an airplane before the war. Now they fasten hydraulic lines, rivet aluminum skin, and wire engines. Teenage sisters from Kentucky, a retired schoolteacher, a grandmother whose hands shook until the riveting gun fired and steadied her grip. One foreman recalled that some recruits didn't know which end of a wrench to hold, yet within weeks were hitting aircraft tolerances. By 1943, the plant employed about 42,000 people, and roughly 1/3 were women. The scale was overwhelming. Workers joked you could walk 5 kilometers per day without leaving the building. A journalist wrote that Willow Run felt like a metal city that had learned to breathe. When the riveters started up, the sound spiked above 110 decibels, louder than a modern rock concert. Welders in one bay swore they could feel other crews working through the walls. Yet this huge machine worked. It worked astonishingly well. Henry Ford did not love Washington, but he loved proving what mass production could do. When Army Air Forces officers asked if Ford would build a bomber plant, he said yes on the spot. Part challenge, part patriotism, part chance to show that auto-style flow could beat any enemy factory. His production chief, Charles Cast Iron Charlie Sorensen, walked a wooden mock-up of the B-24 in California in early 1941 and promised 1 airplane every hour. Engineers who heard it privately thought the goal bordered on fiction. The government paid to raise the mile-long plant, about $47 million in wartime money, and leased it to Ford. Edsel Ford pushed to make it work. He believed the company owed its skills to the war. Sorensen later admitted that during the first months, we were learning the airplane while building the factory to build it. Scaling the plant meant lifting an auto line into the air. Engineers bent the building into an L shape to fit rail spurs and an airfield, then stretched the final assembly line to roughly a mile, so work could stay continuous. Gravity conveyors lowered parts from mezzanines. Tool rooms on the perimeter fed standardized jigs inward like ammunition. Winter threatened the pace, so Ford built steam tunnels to keep pipes from freezing and plowed rail leads day and night so parts trains would not stall. A Michigan cold snap in early 1943 froze hydraulic fittings across several stations, stopping the line. Within 48 hours, Ford installed underfloor heaters to keep it from happening again. Farm fields outside Ypsilanti turned into barracks and a new village. Willow Run Village grew fast, rows of simple units, cafeterias, and schools for the children of swing-shift parents. Buses and special trains ran workers to the plant from Detroit and Toledo. Conductors joked that the Bomber Express was the only train where riders slept sitting up in both directions. A Detroit streetcar operator recalled seeing people with lunch pails at midnight, looking half asleep but proud. Ford's old playbook moved over intact. Time and motion studies, interchangeable fixtures, centralized tool calibration, and relentless material flow. Auto body presses that once stamped fenders now hammered bomber ribs. The company taught suppliers to hit tolerance targets so nose sections from one state could bolt to tail cones from another without shims. Early on, one supplier sent bomb racks a few millimeters off spec. Ford sent a team overnight and redesigned their jig so the next delivery fit, like it came from the same bench. Between January and August 1943, takt time fell from days to hours to the steady 63-minute drumbeat. By mid-1944, Willow Run was turning out one B-24 about every 63 minutes. The line had already produced about 8,685 bombers. Across the country that same year, American factories pushed out roughly 96,000 aircraft, more than Germany built in the entire war. Test pilot Chuck Chase flew many brand new bombers straight off the line. He joked that Willow Run was the only place where a plane could have a wing assembled by someone who'd been a barber last month. But the planes flew and flew well. Another test pilot, Addison Jack Barnes, recalled taking a fresh B-24 up and finding it tight as a drum. He said, "I trusted the crews more than I trusted the Michigan weather." A supervisor once stood outside and watched a long row of silver bombers warming their engines. A visitor beside him asked, "Do you ever get tired of this view?" The supervisor shook his head. "Tired? Every one of these is headed straight for Berlin." Germany felt the pressure. In one U-boat captain's log for early 1944, he wrote, "American bombers appear faster than we can sink their ships. We are fighting a country of factories." The numbers backed him up. By 1944, U.S. industrial output was roughly 5 times larger than the combined Axis output, and the United States produced about 40% of all Allied weapons, including those used by the USSR and the UK. American GDP doubled from 1940 to 1945. Willow Run wasn't just a factory. It showed that the U.S. could turn enormous industrial capacity into military power faster than any nation in history. And once the engines of American industry reached full speed, the outcome of the war began to tilt. The aircraft and the people who flew it. The B-24 began as a rush request in 1939. Consolidated Aircraft sketched the bomber around the new Davis wing, a long, thin airfoil that cut drag and lifted heavy loads. The designers accepted trade-offs. The wing made the bomber fast, but it needed careful handling on landings. They added a tricycle landing gear, unusual for heavy bombers at the time, to keep the nose up and the wing clear of the ground. Pilots developed strong opinions. One ferry pilot said, "She climbed like she wanted to get somewhere, but landed like she wanted to teach you humility." A training instructor in Arizona warned students that a B-24 forgives nothing below 140 on approach. Compared to the earlier B-17, the B-24 flew about 50 miles per hour faster and carried more fuel. Cruise speed sat roughly 10 to 15 miles per hour higher. Range climbed to roughly 2,100 miles with a standard bomb load, about 1/3 more reach than the B-17. On shorter hops, it could lift about 8,000 pounds of bombs. Top speed hovered around 290 miles per hour. The Davis wing's narrow chord cut drag, but iced quickly. Crews carried alcohol de-icer spray and watched weather like hunters. A Liberator pilot in the Aleutians recalled seeing ice form before the sentence was finished and said they treated the de-icer button like a lifeline. The tricycle gear helped on rough forward fields, keeping propellers off debris and letting crews see the runway on night returns. British crews compared it to their Avro Lancaster. The Lancaster could haul about twice the bomb load on short-range missions, but could not match the B-24's reach. Its range was roughly 1/3 shorter. A Lancaster pilot described the Liberator as quicker on cruise, jumpier on landing. Coastal Command took B-24s because they could patrol far out where U-boats thought they were safe. American crews also compared their own bombers. A veteran from the 8th Air Force said, "The fort forgave mistakes, The Lib expected you to fly it every second. Another added, the B-24 gave you distance. It also gave you sweat. Engineers at Willow Run logged pilot complaints, drafty hatches, stiff controls at altitude, balky turrets in the cold, and fed fixes back into the line. Test units reported that Ford-built turrets cycled more smoothly after Ford introduced pre-lubed bearings. The engines that pulled the miles. Each B-24 carried 4 Pratt & Whitney R1830 Twin Wasp radials, 14 cylinders apiece, about 1,200 horsepower early on, creeping toward 1,350 with later ratings. The engines linked to General Electric turbo superchargers that held power at altitude. Their rising whine was part of the airplane's soundscape. Pilots called the turbos the music that meant we'd get home when the boost gauges steadied in the climb. The Twin Wasp came out of Pratt & Whitney's early 1930s push to double the power of its single-row R1340 without doubling frontal drag. Led by engineer George Meade's team in East Hartford, the solution was a compact 2-row, 14-cylinder layout with tight cooling fin geometry and forged master rods to survive higher mean effective pressures. The U.S. Navy wanted a dependable, medium-frame engine for shipboard patrol planes and twin-engine bombers. The result first ran in 1932 and entered service mid-decade. By the time the B-24 flew, the R1830 was a mature design that had already powered DC-3s and PBY Catalinas. General Electric's turbo supercharger, born from NACA altitude research and B-17 experiments, gave the engine high-altitude lungs, exactly why Consolidated and later Ford could promise a bomber with long legs and consistent power above flak. Early runs fought teething problems. Carburetors could backfire if mixtures were hauled lean. Crews learned to move the mixture levers like you're coaxing a cat. Winter cracked cylinder baffles, so Ford thickened the metal and added better cowl flap stops to tame temperature swings. Intercooler doors were rejigged after test pilots found that a 2-inch gap kept cylinder head temps 20 degrees cooler on hot climbs. A Willow Run engineer joked that intercooler doors became our mood ring. Too open and she slowed, too closed and she cooked. Field fixes rolled back to the line. A maintenance chief in Libya sent word that desert dust was chewing compressors. The plant rushed improved air filters and a sealing kit for cowl joints. Ford swapped to pre-lubed magneto bearings after crews in Alaska reported sluggish starts in sub-zero mornings. One chief in Iceland claimed he could start a Twin Wasp with a match and a prayer after those bearings arrived. Anecdotes followed the engines wherever they flew. A ferry pilot remembered an engine quitting over the Rockies. He feathered the prop, then heard the turbo spool down like someone slowly closing a door on the wind. Another crew returning from Ploiești lost oil pressure on number 3, shut it down, and watched the other 3 hold manifold pressure steady for hours. Proof the engines were built with margin. Ground crews timed hot section changes like pit stops. A Willow Run team shaved engine change time from 45 minutes to 21 by pre-staging cowl panels and color-coding hose clamps. How Willow Run learned to build the bomber. When Ford took on the design, the airplane was still being tweaked. Early B-24DS left the factory with thin wiring and drafty hatches. Line workers at Willow Run sent defect lists back to engineers every week. One inspector recalled, "Half our day was fixing leaks. The other half was finding tomorrow's leaks before the Army did." The plant learned to break the bomber into 30,000 subassemblies. Jigs locked parts into position so unskilled workers could rivet with accuracy. Sections met at a moving line. Center wing, outer panels, nose, tail, engines, then landing gear. Ford set a tact goal 1 bomber each hour and rewrote the dance when it missed. At first, the choreography failed. In 1942, the line produced only one bomber per month. By mid-1943, after hundreds of small process changes, Willow Run averaged one per hour. One famous improvement came from a 4-person riveting team who noticed that switching drill operators slowed them down. They reorganized into follow teams, chasing each other down the fuselage skins so pressure stayed consistent. Scrap dropped by 1/3 in their section. Workers called the dorms Ipsitucky because many families had come north from Kentucky and Tennessee. Shift whistles blew at 7 a.m., 3 p.m., and 11 p.m. so the plant could run around the clock. One riveter, Rose Wilmonroe, later became famous as Rosie the Riveter in a government film, holding an air drill like it was a flag. Supervisors tracked training like an army. In 1943, Ford reported about 20 million pages of instruction sheets consumed at Willow Run in 6 months. Mechanics memorized torque charts for Pratt and Whitney engines. Electricians drilled on standardizing wire bundles so any crew chief in the field could trace a fault in minutes. The B-24 had over 1.5 million parts. About 300,000 were rivets. Ford pushed for interchangeable parts, so a nose section from Michigan could mate with a center wing from San Diego. The War Department inspected the finished planes, and by late 1944, noted that Ford-built B-24s required fewer rework hours than planes from earlier runs. Quality hung on a daily defect board: fuel leaks, misaligned control cables, sticky turrets. Fixes logged on one shift fed straight into the next. Small improvements snowballed. Cost also fell. A B-24 built in 1942 cost the government roughly $290,000. By 1944, economies of scale and standardized tooling cut that figure by tens of thousands of dollars per plane. With thousands of bombers, those savings equaled the price of entire fighter groups. Germany tried to disperse aircraft plants to avoid Allied bombing. Parts of a Heinkel or Junkers bomber might pass through dozens of small workshops. That made the system harder to bomb but harder to coordinate. When rail lines were hit, production slowed. Ford's single campus, fed by dedicated rail spurs, kept its rhythm even during Midwest blizzards. A German armaments inspector admitted after the war that American consolidation proved more dangerous than our dispersal. From Willow Run to the front, B-24s left Willow Run and flew to North Africa, England, India, and the Pacific. Crews learned the plane's quirks. The Davis wing gave long legs but iced quickly. Pilots kept throttles balanced so the high-mounted wing did not roll. A veteran recalled, "If your right hand relaxed, the airplane told you. Immediately." In August 1943, 178 B-24s struck the oil refineries at Ploiești, Romania. Losses were heavy, 53 aircraft, but the raid proved the bombers' reach. One bombardier said he could feel the heat from the refineries through the fuselage floor. Another crewman wrote in his diary, "I saw a Liberator ahead of us flying with half a wing. I don't know how he stayed up. I don't know if he did." Later, radar-equipped B-24s hunted U-boats. Sinkings rose, and German captains called the Atlantic a killing ground. A coastal command pilot remembered picking up a surfaced U-boat on radar. They went under, but not fast enough. Bay of Biscay patrols in 1944 paired ASV radar with Lee lights. U-boat crews reported that surprise night attacks felt like the sea had eyes. The mid-Atlantic gap that once let U-boat stalk convoys shrank in 1943 when B-24s flew from Newfoundland, Iceland, and the Azores. New 10-centimeter ASV radar stayed hidden from German detectors, so boats surfaced thinking the sky was empty. The Liberator's tactic was simple: drop from a few hundred feet, snap on the lee light at the last second, and rolled depth charges in a line ahead of the conning tower. A U-boat watch officer wrote that the searchlight tore the night open and turned their bridge white as day. After the spring of 1943, U-boat sinkings climbed, and Dönitz pulled many boats from the North Atlantic, saying air power had stolen the ocean. German Medox receivers could hear old meter-band radar, but they were deaf to the new 10-centimeter sets. By the time snorkels arrived in 1944, B-24 crews had tactics to spot periscopes by wake and radar glint. Forced to travel submerged, U-boats lost speed and battery life. Convoys slipped past while boats hid. Coastal Command tracked attack results and found that radar-guided runs roughly doubled the probability of a damaging hit compared to visual searches in 1942. Night bombing of surfaced boats, once rare, became routine, tightening the chokehold on the Atlantic. Defenses ringed the fuselage, a top turret, waist guns, tail turret, and later a nose turret, with a retractable belly turret on many models. Waist gunners learned to choreograph fields of fire so tracers did not cross. Heated flight suits often failed at altitude, and gunners wrapped rags around metal grips so frost would not stick to their hands. One waist gunner said he once peeled off a glove and lost skin to frozen steel. The bomber carried stories painted on its skin. The Strawberry Bitch flew with the 376th Bomb Group from North Africa. Crews said she came back more patched than pink. On the Ploiești run, Captain John Jerstad stayed low over blazing refineries with a burning wing to hold formation. His plane exploded, but the formation struck the target. In the China-Burma-India theater, B-24s hauled fuel over the Himalayas, flying the hump, losing aircraft to downdrafts and icing, yet keeping forward airfields alive. A pilot who survived a downdraft said, "We dropped 1,000 feet before I had time to swear." On the line, problem-solving felt like combat. When fuel tanks leaked, a team experimented with new sealants over a weekend and cut seepage rates in half. When Midwestern winters froze lubricants, Ford tested heaters under the moving line so hydraulic fittings would not crack. A wartime visitor remembered seeing a foreman hold a stopwatch while workers swapped engine cowlings. They cut the time from 40 minutes to 12. By late 1944, U.S. aircraft output was roughly twice what Germany managed that year. Willow Run alone matched the entire German long-range bomber total across the war. Factories fed flight lines carried bombs to Berlin, depth charges to the Bay of Biscay, and fuel to distant Pacific strips. The day still began the same way. Before sunrise, the plant breathed in the cold air, lights flickered on, and the low hum grew into a roar. Engines coughed awake at the far end of the line. Every hour another silver bomber rolled forward, proof that industrial discipline could turn steel and labor into force again and again, until the war tilted.